Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Mega-eco Symposium. Today we'll be starting out with a message from Richard Weller, who was previously the chair of landscape architecture, but unfortunately could not make it today.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Richard Weller. I'm the former chair of landscape architecture at the Weitzman School of Design. I'd like to welcome you all to Philadelphia. Thank you for making your way to this symposium. I think this will be an important event, and we're delighted that you're all here to discuss the concept of the Mega-eco Project. I come to you now from the other side of the world, in a city called Perth, which is the capital of the state of Western Australia, smack bang in the middle of the southwest West Australian biodiversity hotspot. And we have our own Mega-eco project going on here right now. It's been going on for over 20 years. And that is known as the Gondwana Link project, which seeks to restore and connect over 1,000 kilometres of denuded landscape throughout the agricultural belt of the southwest West Australian biodiversity hotspot. It's an incredibly ambitious and complicated project, complicated socially, economically, politically, culturally. It involves Indigenous peoples, farmers, conservationists, local communities, and yet it's moving along, right? It's moving along. It's really happening, and it seems like projects that are as ambitious as that and as big as that are the exception as opposed to being the rule. And yet, from our research at Penn over the recent years, we've established that there are more than 250 of these exact types of large-scale restorative endeavours going on around the world today. And today, the first day of the symposium, we're going to hear from a sample set of those projects that represent the range of projects being undertaken. And Rob will speak more to the particular categories, the way we've organised them and so on. But if you just sit back for a minute and think about this, what's happening is that despite all the doom and gloom, human beings are also demonstrating an incredible ability to self-organise and undertake these large-scale restorative works. And that is a historical turning point. I mean, that's a profoundly important and optimistic moment in history, I think. And so that's something that this symposium wants to sort of capture. And, but, you know, we're academics. We're not just here to celebrate things. We are here to critically examine these works, and that goes to the reason why I think we've insisted on calling them Mega-eco projects as opposed to nature-based solutions. I mean, obviously, mega means big, and these are very big projects. But more importantly, by referring to them as Mega-eco projects, we place them within the tradition and the genre, if you like, of the mega project. And the old school, you know, concrete mega project from the 20th century, let's just say it doesn't have such a good reputation. And so the question becomes for the Mega-eco project of today and of the future, how do they avoid some of the pitfalls and problems that old school mega projects, I should say, have encountered? And so that's really the purpose of the symposium, to try and drill down into what makes a successful Mega-eco project. And so I think that's a really worthy basis for a symposium. And I would like to thank the school, of course, for hosting the symposium, the McHarg Centre for helping us get the symposium organised and funded, and Penn Global, which funds research within the university. It's fantastic to work for a university that respects and funds innovation and research. I would like to thank our Clara Sophia, the research assistant that has helped deliver the symposium and organise it, and my colleagues, Matthias Bau and Rob Levinthal, with whom I've worked closely over the years on a number of things. But Rob and Matthias will be the MCs for both these days of the symposium. And I just wish you all well. Enjoy Philadelphia, enjoy the symposium, and I'm very much looking forward to learning more about the case studies today and then learning about the findings of the roundtable tomorrow. Again, thank you for all coming and being part of this symposium. I'm sure it's going to be a landmark event.
Next, I would like to introduce Catherine Seavitt, the new chair and professor of landscape architecture.
On this vibrant terrain. As designers and thinkers, we endeavor to build in ways that lead toward justice, and we are committed to working to dismantle the ongoing consequences of settler colonialism. Today is truly a global gathering that looks beyond the political constructs of borders, borders that carry no weight in the earthly world of ecological corridors and interspecies entanglements. We must think of these borders as new expanded thresholds, indeed, spaces of opportunity, as we necessarily grapple with both the climate crisis and the crisis of mass extinction. We are honored to be together today with representatives from major ecological restoration projects on the ground and around the planet that transcend these municipal, state, and even national borders. Our speakers, who are all working on the forefront and in the literal fields of restoration thinking and theory, will share cross-border approaches to connectivity, anti-desertification, watersheds, and metropolitan development. And we're thrilled that today's symposium will be introduced by keynote speaker Tony Hiss, the distinguished author and co-creator of the Half-Earth Movement, 50% Land Protection by 2050. As we begin today, I thought we might consider indigenous management practices that are critically valuable to any discussion of so-called restoration and long-term land stewardship. As a First Nations Dene leader from the Northwest Territories of Canada stated during the Berger Inquiry of the 1970s, a landmark event addressed by Tony in his recent book, Rescuing the Planet, there is no word in our language for wilderness, for everywhere we go is home. People are forever a part of nature. Indeed, so-called wilderness has never been uninhabited. Here are a few of these stewarded natures. An old-growth boreal forest in Quebec's Michigamish Broadback Valley, stewarded by the Cree First Nation of Waswapnipi and part of their ancestral lands. As a strategy for tackling biodiversity loss, Canada has established Indigenous protected areas to help manage its taiga, or boreal forest. The taiga is the world's largest intact forest ecosystem and one of its biggest stores of carbon. The Cree act to resist deforestation and safeguard this valuable carbon sink. The Menominee tribal forest in northern Wisconsin is stewarded and harvested by the Menominee tribe. They've sustainably logged their forest for over 160 years, a carefully managed balance of hand cutting and regrowth that has produced over 200 million cubic feet of timber since 1854. This biodiverse forest is home to wolves, bears, otters, and hawks, respected by the Menominee as kin. The Menominee have select and cut only trees that are very old or sick and harvest those that have fallen, leaving high-quality trees to reproduce. The Gondwana Link project in the Great Western Woodlands of Australia is part of the world's largest temperate forest. As noted by Richard Weller in his introductory remarks, this project, a gathering of a patchwork of parks, refuges, and protected areas, shares its restoration efforts with the Gaju and Nyungar peoples, working across artificially delineated borders. In respectful partnership with lived, traditional, and embodied ecological knowledge is certainly the best way forward as we consider the necessary scale of the mega-eco. We're so happy to welcome you all here today, and I'd like to now invite the Dean of the Weitzman School of Design, Fritz Steiner, for some introductory remarks on behalf of the school. Thank you all for coming.
Okay, welcome. Wonderful to see Richard this morning from the other side of the world. In thinking about welcoming everyone this morning, it's often as dean, I'm a sort of perfunctory, I have a role in these kind of things of welcoming people and then handing it off to real substance. But in the case of this morning, the topic is one that I'm very close to. And I was thinking of looking back at the history of our country, the United States, and remembering, when when the country had our act together enough to take on big projects. And the last time we really did that was the New Deal. And the New Deal, in many ways, that influence lasted for better and for worse into the 1960s. And then I think we stopped doing really large-scale projects of the nature of the New Deal. And underlying the New Deal was theories about regionalism. And one of the most important thinkers in that regard, of course, was Lewis Mumford. And Mumford and other regional theorists had a really profound influence on the New Deal. So what kinds of influences are there today that inform the Mega project? And I think that one of those is the concept of mega regions. And that concept, at least in the United States, began here at Penn about 20 years ago in a city planning studio taught by Bob Yarrow and Armando Carbonell of the Lincoln Institute and Jonathan Barnett, professor of practice, who's in the audience today. And Bob Yarrow took this concept, and he was also, in addition to being a professor of practice here, he's also the director of the Regional Plan Association in New York. So Bob really advocated this idea, this vision of mega regions. He got, this is an adaptation of the map that was done by the students in the studio in the early 21st century. And Bob enlisted sort of people across the country, academics, to pursue this mega region concept further. This is where the mega region concept stands. Bob and my colleague from the University of Texas, Ming Yang, and I published a book. And we're still, some of us are still, is the Northeast mega region one region, a mega region, or two mega regions? I'll leave that. You guys can, I've been wondering about that for some time. But this is sort of where we're at with mega regions in the United States. And it's a concept that has global implications. We have a Great Lakes mega region in the United States. Really, it's the United States and Canada. But there's also a Great Lakes mega region in Africa. In the idea of mega regions in the United States was really informed by what was going on in Europe at the time. And of course, it had to be the French. I mean, no one else would have a mega region and then call it the blue banana. You know, we have these really, except for the Texas Triangle, which is kind of evocative. I think we could benefit from the sort of naming. So there's the blue banana and then the yellow banana. But also in Asia, particularly in China, the idea of mega regions has caught on. And one of the, I think, pitfalls of mega regions is, again, I think it was Lewis Mumford. It could have been René Debow. They're both cited as the source of this quote. And I don't know which one it is, or maybe somebody else. But let's call, since we're on a Mumford roll this morning, let's go with Mumford. He observed trend is not destiny. So a lot of the mega regional thought has been based on population and economic trends. So are there other ways of looking at mega regions besides population and economics? And I think there is. And one of the really interesting ideas in the history of the United States is John Wesley Powell, who was a legitimate character. I mean, the guy had one of his arms shot off in the Civil War. He was the first American, not Native American, but European American, who went down the Colorado River. And he founded the U.S. Geological Society and the Ethnographic Bureau of the Smithsonian, and on and on and on. But he had this really audacious idea. He said, you know, Jefferson's got it wrong. We can't keep perpetuating the Jeffersonian grid. We really ought to think in terms of hydrologic systems. So he had this proposal to redo the Western United States based on drainage basins. Congress didn't exactly embrace it, but some of the ideas of drainage basins found their way into projects in the New Deal. A few years ago, about 10 years ago, the landscape architects Laurel McSherry and Rob Holmes won a competition, and they went a couple steps further than John Wesley Powell. They suggested redoing the whole United States based on drainage basins. And you can see the obvious John Wesley Powell influence. They went one step further and they said, we just do away with states and reorganize the country based on commonwealths. I was happy to see Austin, Texas, would remain the capital of that particular drainage basin because I was living in Austin at the time. So, you know, and if we go beyond hydrologic regions, we can look at ecoregions. And one of the many interesting things about ecoregions is they get more and more level 1 and level 2 and level 3. Level 2 kind of what I would say would be ecological megaregions. So with that, I've got the 1 minute sign. Everybody needs to follow when she hands up that 1 minute thing. So it's now my great pleasure to introduce Tony Hiss. He's the author of 15 books, including, as Rob mentioned, Rescuing the Planet, Protecting Half of the Earth to Heal the Earth, about staving off the biodiversity and extinction crisis. He's also the author of the award-winning The Experience of Place, about how we've affected our surroundings, both in cities and the countryside. After his graduation from Harvard, Tony was the staff writer at the New Yorker magazine for more than 30 years, and a visiting scholar at New York University for 25 years. He has lectured around the world on planning, biodiversity, and conservation. And with my friend and co-author Bob Yarrow, he co-authored the third regional plan for the city of New York. And a report wrote to the New York State for the 150-mile Hudson River Valley Natural Heritage Area. He's been a Guggenheim Fellow and has written about other special landscapes, about travel and trains, about cooking, about giant pandas, about his family. And on September 2023, Tony was named Conservation of the Year by the Western New York Land Conservancy. So let's welcome Tony Hiss.
I'm so pleased, indeed excited to be part of this historic gathering. The first ever get-together of people working on protecting enormous landscapes at the largest possible scale, and which means protecting biodiversity, which means protecting life itself, a subject the world is just beginning to embrace and champion. So I think, and I'll tip my hand here, I think this is the beginning of a series of meetings. There were rumblings even last night when people were informally beginning to get together of how exciting it was for everyone to be together and what that could accomplish. You know, in Philadelphia, there was a meeting in 1776 of a group that called itself the Continental Congress. And you know what emerged from it was the Declaration of Independence. In 1945 in San Francisco, the remaining New Dealers that Fritz was talking about convened a meeting of the nations of the world to create the United Nations. I think this is the beginning of an international Congress leading to united landscapes of the world. So I'm way ahead of myself, but sorry, that's what I think. And I want to thank Richard Weller and Rob for having this idea of bringing people together, and Rob in particular for actually making it possible for us all to be here today. So they need a big hand. Thank you so much. So here we are talking about this audacious scale of work. And it also brings with it an audacious mindset, the ability to focus on all of life at once, the needs of countless species, big and small. Can't think of a better place for such a meeting to be than here at the Weitzman School. Fritz has already gone through some of the work that he and Bob Yarrow did, and Jonathan, pulling together the idea of the mega regions. Richard has, of course, leapfrogged over the whole idea of national parks, thinking of the world as part of a world park with 3 intercontinental trails across the continents. And if you want a monument to Ian McHarg, travel 100 miles south and just north of Baltimore, a landscape that developers were slavering over 70 years ago, still looks the way it did 70 years ago because he was able to tell people where to build and where not to build with his amazing design with nature concepts. So there they still are, the beautiful landscapes of Baltimore County. Okay, the word mega seems to have become a popularized word in 1956 when IBM introduced RAMAC, its first computer. Love that picture of the 60s, of the 50s there. One woman sitting at a desk could suddenly recall instantaneously every business record that a company had been compiling for 100 years or more. It was as big as a refrigerator, weighed a couple of tons, but it got things started, and it had a capacity of 5 megabytes. Mega. Okay, the word mega came to us, and now we have lotteries like Mega Millions since 1902, and now it covers 45 states in the District of Columbia. Just this morning, Lois and I saw on TV a commercial for a slightly bigger roll of towels, paper towels, Mega Bounty. And of course, Elon Musk doesn't just build mega projects, he builds giga projects. This is a gigafactory of his under construction, and I particularly like the picture down at the lower right, comparing the size of one of his gigafactories to the tallest buildings in the world. When it comes to environmental issues, I think the extraordinary crisis that we've created since World War II has had 3 phases of recognition. One had to do with just poisoning the place. One had to do with boiling the place. And the one we're just coming to terms with has to do with obliterating the life in the place. The first one that Rachel Carson brought to our attention in 1962 with Silent Spring could be taken in, as she said, through the ears. We were listening to the absence of sound from birds and insects that had been killed by DDT. The second one is suddenly imposing itself on us. Things have gotten pretty weird in terms of climate. Just this summer now we have not just blue skies, we have green skies brought about by these strange storms called derechos, which are like twisters except the wind blows straight, derecho meaning straight ahead in Spanish. And then so many of the cities in the country were blanketed with orange skies from the wildfires up in the boreal region of Canada. So why does it take so much more of us to get our minds really wrapped around this whole biodiversity crisis, the obliteration of life? Well, there's so many reasons. For one thing, we just still don't know what's here around us. It was an article of faith that octopuses were solitary creatures, but just this summer we found the octopus garden off the coast of California. All these female octopuses nursing their eggs had found a warm spot, so they gathered together because that meant they could give birth quicker and their babies would be less endangered. Another study has just showed us that something like 59% of all species live under the ground. I mean, look down for a moment. Are you accustomed to thinking that most of life is down there? I'm not. And then, of course, there's better known the idea that we depend on so much of life to stay alive ourselves that a third of the food we eat needs to be pollinated by insects. A new study showing that earthworms make the soil so fertile that we grow that much extra grain every year, the same amount that Russia grows. And then what we're doing to the place. A new study is showing we're not just lopping off species, and 1 million species of plants and animals are at risk. We're beginning to lop off higher branches of the tree of life, genera, families, orders, all because it was just so easy to kill things. It's a picture of Portuguese sailors slaughtering the poor old dodos. Dodos had no predators until we came along, had never learned fear. And then it's not just what we're surrounded by, it's the nature of nature. Suddenly we know that elephants are compassionate. We know that octopuses can recognize faces. And the bees again. An article came out just last summer saying that an individual bee has a brain no bigger than a poppy seed, and yet it has a rich inner life. What's the obvious conclusion from all this? We are surrounded by awareness, not just life, meaning there is no such thing as an empty lot or vacant land. It may not have human uses, but it is teeming with life. So that doesn't mean we can't add human uses. It does mean we have to think in terms of making something which I like to think of as all species design, respecting our needs and the needs of other species, either the ones already there or the ones that we might attract. And that is going to revolutionize the studies that you are undertaking here at the Weitzman School. The students who are preparing to become architects or designers or planners or landscape architects will all have to get good at all species design for us to survive. And that means they're going to have to start using their minds in this expanded way. Take a look for 1 second at this scary visage. It's Vladimir Vernadsky, who in the 1920s wrote the first book-length description of the biosphere. He's a man who amazingly is equally revered in Ukraine and Russia. In Russia, there are subway stations in Moscow named after him, a crater on the dark side of the moon. The Ukrainian outpost in Antarctica is called the Vernadsky Station. And it was Vernadsky who showed that the biosphere was not only ancient, nearly as old as the planet, and so resilient and abundant, having produced so many species, but also had this third dimension, or almost this lack of a third dimension, its thinness. It's only 12.5 miles thick for most species that live between the top of Everest and the bottom of the Mariana Trench in the Pacific. A distance that, as someone said, it laid out flat, you could drive across in less than 20 minutes. So one of its innate characteristics is its vulnerability. Also, of course, it's not a sphere at all, is it? It's this weird, strange shape, unlike anything else we know. We don't live really so much on Earth as we live within this strange shaped thing that's so thin and so pervasive. Now, as for half Earth, a phrase I came up with talking to E.O. Wilson one day. That's based on just some decent science, saying that in terms of field studies, most creatures that we know of need to retain at least half of their original habitat in order to thrive, stay healthy. Some need more, some need less, so it's just a rough figure. But what it translates into is the fact that we've only protected about 15 to 17% of the world so far, starting with Yellowstone, 1872. Took us 150 years to get that far. But if we stayed at that level, maybe only a quarter of the species would survive long term, whereas bump it up to half, 85 to 90% have a good chance of surviving. That's worth repeating. 50% gives us 85 to 90%. Not everything, but close to everything. So how long have people been able to think in a more expanded way? Well, there's this wonderful story that has been told for thousands of years in China about a father and a son, Kun and Yu. Kun was charged by the emperor, if he existed, it was maybe 4,300 years ago, with controlling devastating floods, and for 9 years he built earthen dikes around a raging river, but each one of them was washed away. He went back to the emperor, and the emperor said, "I'm going to chop your head off," and turned to his son, "You, what a pickle to be in." But you spent 13 years, and he came at it a different way. He deepened the channel of the river so the river could stay where it was. Stephen Mithen, the British archaeologist, has said, this is the difference between the Kun approach and the Yu approach, is the difference between the Confucian approach of trying to impose control on a place and the Taoist approach of working with what's there. Whether or not Yu, who for his success was dubbed Yu the Great and later himself became emperor, whether he not existed, this contrast has existed that long. And we do know that in 256 BC, a Taoist solution to a raging river was created by Li Bing, and by creating an artificial island in the middle of a raging river. And that's still in operation today, still controlling floods thousands of years later. So indigenous people we know have kept this way of thinking alive all that time, but us European Americans have been slower to catch up with it, although one of the first to do so 100 years ago or so, Benton Mackay, the year he graduated from college, took a friend, they bushwhacked their way up Stratton Mountain, one of the Green Mountains in Vermont, no trails in those days, found the tallest trees they could find, shinnied up to the top, and swaying there, Mackay had this vision of being in a single place that stretched all the way from Maine to Georgia along the roofs of the Appalachians, what he called a planetary feeling. And then 21 years later or so, he produced his plan for the Appalachian Trail, which so caught people's imaginations that over the next 12 years, the trail came into being, mostly by volunteers. It's supposedly the world's largest piece of infrastructure entirely voluntarily constructed. Now, Mackay's vision was equaled in the 90s by a Canadian lawyer and conservation activist, Harvey Locke, who, camping out in the Canadian Rockies, had this similar vision that he was in a single place that stretched from Yellowstone Park all the way north to the top of the Yukon. And from that, of course, the Y2Y, the Yukon, Yellowstone to Yukon movement has come into being, and we're very fortunate to have Jody Hilty, who's now running that project with us as one of the projects of today. So even though indigenous people have kept this expansive way of thinking alive, the problem the world has come up with and that we're running up against is that for thousands of years, there have been more Kuns than Yus. Yes, the Neolithic villagers did amazing things. They were able to tame animals, but the animals they tamed began overgrazing the grasses. Yes, they did a wonderful thing of being able to tame crops and grow them, but the crops exhausted the soil, and then irrigation brought salt into the soil. And yes, they chopped down too many trees, and that caused erosion. But they always had a solution. They could move on to the next, as in Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland's Mad Tea Party, they could move from a dirty set of dishes down the table to a clean set of dishes. They could always go elsewhere. And now there's no more elsewhere, only a here. So how do we get better at thinking this way? Well, a 13th century poet, an Afghan named Jalaluddin Rumi, has some advice. Because of necessity, man acquires organs, meaning organs of perception. Man, of course, meaning man and woman. So increase your need, he suggested. Well, the need is there. And I keep running across all kinds of groups who would be so much a part of any second meeting of mega projects. Hard to think of all of them, but there are, I did make a note here. Give me one moment. There is this wonderful new movement in Canada where the Canadian governor is finally turning to the Indigenous people and said, we want to put you in charge of a whole second network of national parks that you will run. You will be the mucklucks and moccasins on the ground. These parks are coming into being. They're dwarfing Yellowstone in size. There's a group in New England called Wildlands, Woodlands, Farmlands, and Communities that wants to keep the 6 states of New England 80% forested forever. It's now 81%. The Wildlands Network is promoting continental wildways that cross Canada, the US, and Mexico. The Wild Federation is organizing Wild 12, a World Wilderness Congress. E.O. Wilson's successor project, the E.O. Wilson Biodiversity Project, is sponsoring Half Earth Day. Of course, it's halfway around from Earth Day. Next one is next week. And there's another, the Wild Foundation is also, and the wilderness groups are also sponsoring Nature Needs Half, the continuation of Harvey Locke's own vision. So it's burgeoning, and just in time, because time couldn't be more urgent. We got to get this done as quickly as possible. So if anyone would like to follow some of the themes touched on here, please take a look at my book. Authors always need that, readers. But remember, there is no empty land, no such thing as a vacant lot anywhere. So now let's get started. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hiss, for the great work you are doing in promoting the Half-Earth vision. And greetings to all of those who have traveled far and wide to the Weitzman School of Design at the University of Pennsylvania for the Mega-eco Symposium on Lenape land. It is my honor to welcome you all here as I lay out what inspired this event and what to expect today. The world is in a state of multiple crises, with rampant biodiversity loss, atmospheric carbon at an all-time high, and a burgeoning population with oversized demands on our natural resources. Yet the point of today's gathering is not to lament over this struggle, but to celebrate human ingenuity to combat these crises head-on and to begin a conversation with the initiatives that are at the necessary scale to make a real, notable impact. My PhD research, in partnership with Richard Weller, has identified over 250 mega-eco projects and counting across 4 types, where governments, nonprofits, NGOs, local communities, and grassroots organizations are coming together to restore ecosystems and manufacture ecosystem services with a drive toward greater resilience and adaptation at scale. We welcome 11 esteemed directors, leaders, scholars, and technicians that have worked on, developed the vision for, or working toward a successful implementation of 10 inspiring mega-eco projects from around the world. We have asked each presenter to introduce their selected initiatives in 15 minutes and participate in one of 4 30-minute discussions. This will be driven by our 5 expert panelists from organizations leading the way to a brighter future. And if there are time for additional questions at the end of each panel, we welcome you, the audience, to participate as well. Before I introduce the run of show, I want to give a quick explanation of the new concept of mega-eco projects, which is intended to fill a gap in the existing literature, to add to the public lexicon, but also to realign expectations. We coined this term well aware of the international movement of nature-based solutions, and in the broadest sense, mega-eco projects share the same goals of attempting to reverse biodiversity loss, provide resilience and adaptation to climate change, and enhance human well-being. Yet many of the mega-eco projects are not recognized as nature-based solutions. Others fall short of their standards, and still more do not seek this classification. With the global crisis needing to be addressed 20 years ago, and a strong push for nature-based solutions to be built at scale now, we thought it necessary, rather than to start from scratch and pretend that working at this scale is a new phenomenon, that we may learn from these existing works towards creating best practices from their experiences. While we appreciate nature-based solutions for galvanizing the public and making it easier to demand an alternative to hard infrastructure of concrete and steel, we also want to acknowledge some of the term's other limitations. First, the use of the word nature is variously problematic. Novelist and academic Raymond Williams in 1976 noted that nature is the most complex word in the English language. His most important point for this discussion is that it creates a binary between nature and culture, which separates people from wild or open spaces. A fallacy, and something that John Muir got wrong over 150 years ago, and conservation initiatives often still fail to recognize today. Second, the use of the word solution is inaccurate. This framing derives from the engineering solutions, an antiquated and dangerous outlook. Take, for example, a dam, which is intended to stop flooding, provide drinking water, supply irrigation needs, and create electricity. But it is far from a complete solution when we recognize its many negative externalities and trade-offs. Dams are the leading cause of freshwater species and diadromous fish decline. They are responsible for the tragic disappearance of wetlands, estuaries, and floodplains worldwide. They create harmful algal blooms, which expel massive amounts of methane, a powerful greenhouse gas, despite being labeled as a clean energy source. And often they lack the ability to adapt to today's new regimes of flooding and drought. We want to recognize that we do not know all the outcomes of nature-based solutions, or mega-eco projects, and the adverse effects they may cause. And we believe this should be a transparent and a freeing process which will aid in better deployment, knowledge sharing, and the reduction of greenwashing. To do so, we borrow another engineering term, drawing comparisons to megaprojects. Megaprojects are commonly recognized as concrete and steel infrastructure that cost $1 billion or more since there was an uptick in public works in the 1950s. In a recent review of thousands of these works, Bent Flyvberg and others proposed the iron law of megaprojects, and that they are constantly over time, over budget, and underperform over and over again. Only in recent years has this trend slightly improved, representing an 80-year learning curve which mega-eco projects simply cannot afford to follow. Our new term, beginning with the prefix mega, often simplified to mean something very large, is also helpful in putting in conversation with complex contemporary phenomenon such as the megacity, the megalopolis, the megaregion, and the megastructure. With these matters in mind, we define mega-eco projects as complex, landscape scale, ecological restoration and construction endeavors that aim to help biodiversity and communities adapt and respond to degraded ecosystems and climate change. After identifying hundreds of projects around the globe that fit within this definition, we found that they often shake out into 4 types in which these projects' missions typically adhere to. And we use them to establish the 4 panels for today's symposium. They include the connectivity of open space, which features projects from Dominic Bakaba and the Strong Roots Guerrilla Corridor in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Dr. Jody Hilty with the Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative in central United States and Canada, as well as Andrea Fernanda Calderon Caicedo and Ana Maria Gonzalez Veloza from the heart of the Colombian Amazon Project. Next, we have combating desertification with Dr. Elvis Paul Enfor Tangum with the Great Green Wall Initiative, a sub-Saharan African project, as well as Faiz Ali Khan from Upscaling Green Pakistan program, which was formerly known as the 10 Billion Tree Tsunami. Our third type is enhancing waterways and watersheds, featuring Ben Volks and the Araguaia Biodiversity Corridor in Brazil. Next, we have Marshall Plumley from the Upper Mississippi River Restoration Program in central United States, and Youngjin Jo with the 4 Major Rivers Restoration Project in South Korea. And finally, we have creating resilience in metropolitan areas, with Hexing Chang and the Sponge City Initiative across many urban areas in China, and Rodrigo Victor and the Sao Paulo Greenbelt and Biosphere Reserve in Brazil. These projects were selected from hundreds of initiatives worldwide that fit within our proposed definition. They're also at the proper scale for our themes to be deemed mega from parameters we created using existing literature and online databases. Staying true to our alignment with mega projects, we also determined the level of well-funded projects that may fall slightly under these spatial parameters, but should be included in these conversations as well. This is a working typology, and we welcome feedback and collaboration with the scientific community and others following the event. We recognize that these types and themes are not perfect, and we embrace this with 3 projects today that defy simple classification: the Araguaia Biodiversity Corridor, Upscaling Green Pakistan Program, and the Sao Paulo Greenbelt. While we originally believed that mega-eco projects were a relatively new phenomenon that were quickly multiplying in the present day, it became clear that large-scale visions built using primarily organic materials and the landscape have a long history. These projects have been proven to be powerful in both positive and dangerous ways, which is why we want to come together today to learn and speak frankly about their potential impacts. Some cautionary tales from history include the draining of the 8th largest freshwater lake, the Aral Sea, which was set in motion with Stalin's so-called Great Plan for the Transformation of Nature, beginning in the 1940s. The exacerbation of famine and the unjust taxation of salt with the British's Great Hedge of India in 1854, and the 1935 Prairie States Forestry Project, which was implemented by a segregated workforce with unequal opportunities for people of color and none for women, and the creation of a novel ecosystem with the introduction of trees and invasive species into a previously treeless Great Plains bioregion, and the further fixation of colonial claims into indigenous territories. But despite all these problems, we must also recognize that their prairie project stopped expansive erosion during the Dust Bowl, which saved 1/5 of the country from turning into desert. We believe that these projects have a great capacity to make positive change. We must also acknowledge that they possess the ability to do significant harm, both socially and environmentally. Through this symposium, we seek to establish that landscape architects and regional planners have a pivotal role to play in shaping the development and outcome of these projects. These disciplines have been thinking at this scale for over 100 years, and Waring Manning's vision in 1923 of a connected network of open spaces and trails appears to be finally be coming to fruition. But they But in the present day, there seems to be a lack of significant contributions from these professions, and we hope to see this filled. Today, we will be hearing from incredible project leaders from around the world. Following these panels, Penn Professor of Practice, Matthias Bau, one of the few architects working in this space, will share reflections on this first day of presentations. Tomorrow, he will help lead a panel into best practices for mega-eco projects in what we hope to be an honest, invigorating discussion. I would like to thank all of the research assistants, volunteers, Weitzman's faculty and staff that made this day possible. We would also like to thank our generous sponsors who have made this symposium truly global: the Weitzman School of Design, the McHarg Center, Penn Environmental Innovation Initiative, Biohabitats, Penn Global, and the Landscape Architecture Foundation for its promotional partnership.